Hey, welcome back to another TouchDesigner tutorial. Today, we're going to be doing an intro to hand tracking, and we're going to make this watercolor effect. Notice that I've got a pen here. I can kind of place it down and start to draw and paint, and then if I move my hand further away, it picks up the pen. I can place it down again, and I can grow and shrink the brush size. I can clear it by pointing up. I can also do a thumbs up, and that'll switch to another brush. So I can even use like a live video as a part of my brush. I can hit the thumbs up again, and I can even paint in with the live webcam. For today's tutorial, we're going to be using a little component here that I've created. I'm going to make it free and available on my Patreon, so I'll put a link to that in the description, and you can download this little clamp math component. I'm going to make this entire project file available for download for my paid Patreon members, and I'll put a link to that in the description as well. If you want to learn more about MediaPipe and the other tracking capabilities that you can play around with, go ahead and check out my previous tutorial on MediaPipe, where I go into the face tracking, hand tracking, pose tracking, and a bunch of different features. But for today, we're going to be really just doing a deep dive into hand tracking. And if you want to do a continuation of this and explore some more advanced topics, I have a 3-part master course that I've put also on YouTube for free that you can check out after this video. I'm going to go ahead and delete everything in this project except for the MediaPipe component, and we're going to start by downloading the MediaPipe talks and also that clamp math component. So go ahead and get started by heading on over to the GitHub for the MediaPipe TouchDesigner plugin. This was created by myself and Dom Scott. If you haven't checked out their work, I'll put a link to it in the description. You should definitely go check out Dom's work. To download it, you're going to head on over to this download latest release button, click this, and you're going to get a zip file. And while that's loading, go ahead and head on over to the link in the description for my Patreon, and I'll put a link to this clamp math component. If you register for free, you will see this little clamp math talks component, and you can go ahead and click on that to download it. Go ahead and unzip that release.zip folder, and make sure if you're on Windows, it's very easy to accidentally just go inside the folder without extracting the contents. Make sure that you've unzipped it. And what we're going to do is we're going to take this talks folder and make sure that you've saved your TouchDesigner project. And what we're going to do is we're going to copy that talks folder so that it is right next to wherever you have saved your .to file. So notice that I have the talks folder here, and I have the MediaPipe talks and all that good stuff. So I'm also going to take that clamp math talks and also drag it into this same folder. And then you're going to go ahead and drag this MediaPipe talks and drop it into your TouchDesigner project. Once it's there, you will need to turn off a bunch of the different models. These will be toggled on by default. And what it will do is it'll give you the ability to turn on and off different tracking models. So if you want to get rid of these green overlays, you can go ahead and turn off the show overlays. That's an easy way to kind of show or hide those. And the other thing that we'll need for this demo is also the hand tracking talks. So go ahead and drop that in. And we're also going to drop in the clamp math talks so that we can use it for later. The location that we want to connect the hand tracking to is this second output here. Basically, the MediaPipe component has outputs for the different machine learning models that it can process, and this one's for hands. Once we do that, you can go ahead and turn on and off cooking for this component, and that should get rid of the error. And now we have the option to explore some of the different hand tracking pieces. You can always right click on the little outputs here and it will automatically try to connect an operator. So here, if I type in null, we can just make a little placeholder so we can see what's going on. So this first output renders these white dots. And this can be a really easy way of kind of adding in some nicer visuals for ourselves. So I could put in an over instead. And the last output here, notice that it is a top as well, so we can layer this on top of it, and now we get the white dots, and maybe we'll turn off the segments here. So this is an easy way of just getting a direct mapping of those dots onto your video. Let's take a look at even just drawing a circle on our pointer finger. So I'll make a null here again, and I want to just be able to create a circle. This first output here, if I put a null down, this is actually all of our hand data for our left and our right hand. And an easy way of kind of filtering that down is to put a select chop And we can click on this arrow here and we can see the list of everything that's available. So you can see here there's H1 is going to be whatever hand goes into the frame first. If I move it out, notice that it doesn't actually correspond to my left or right hand. If I put my left hand in, it'll also be H1 that lights up first. And we want to get our index fingertip. So we can scroll down until we see our index fingertip X. And now we can kind of get the X position for that. And one way of getting the Y position, we could also just go back into this list again and find it. Or you could just select this text, copy it, add a space, paste it in, and we'll change this X to a Y instead. Now we'll get the X and Y. There's a lot of cases actually where you want to get all of the data associated with it. So there's a really nice shorthand where you can actually just put a star and it's kind of a catch-all for any of the data. So this is another way of doing this where instead of getting just our H1 index fingertip colon, you can do index fingertip colon star. And now it actually ends up bringing in the X, Y, and Z. So the star is basically like anything, any text can follow after this. Great. For this next part, what we want to do is just take a circle top and let's rescale this to fit our parent panel size. So in the common section, we'll rescale this and let's maybe set the radius a little bit smaller to like 0.8. And we just want to change the X and Y position for this. So the normal way of doing this is to put a null. So you can just right click on these tabs here and we'll connect the null. And you can put it into an active mode by clicking on the star here, and we'll drag the X position over to the center, and we'll drag the Y position over to the center Y, and you'll do a chop reference. And now you should see as we move it, it's definitely not mapped to the right spot quite yet. And that is because our circle data, when it's at 0, 0, is in the center, but our hand tracking data goes from 0 to 1. And so what we need to do is basically remap this. So now we can put a math chop in between here. If you right click, you can insert an operator and we'll add in a math. And in the range section, this is the data, the incoming data that we're getting. And so it is from 0 to 1, and we want to remap it to be from negative 0.5 to 0.5. So now when we move it around, we should see that circle. And let's try compositing that over. There's an over top we can connect it to over our actual video. So we can see there, beautiful. We can select that out and map it very, very easily. That's kind of helpful for our brush, but the problem is you notice that in our interaction, I'm going to maybe scale the radius of this down even more just so you can see that it's aligning nicely with my fingertip. One thing that's a little tricky for our brush is that if you were to just use your fingertip for placing the brush or growing the size of it, when you pinch to grow the size of it, it would just move your brush around. So instead, what I like to use is the midpoint between my pointer and my thumb. And that data is actually available here in this third output of the hand tracking. So here, if I right click and put a null down, you'll notice that these are a bunch of little helper values that are available to us. And one of the ones that's available is the distance between our index finger and our thumb, and also the position of that midpoint. That one's called the H1 pinch midpoint X, Y, and Z. And we also get a rotation too. So those are all pieces that can be really helpful for some of our hand tracking. So let's, instead of doing this mapping with our index finger, let's change it to be our pinch midpoint. So we don't really need to select it out. I think there's already few enough channels that we can kind of just pass that data on. And I'm going to show you how to use this clamp math. So this does something very similar to the math component. And really, it's actually just a math. It limits the range of it, so it can't go above or below, and then it adds a little bit of easing to it. And what we can do is connect this here. And we really just want to apply it to a couple channels. So if you turn on and off cooking on this, it will display the list of channels that are available. And so in this case, we want to apply it just to the pinch midpoint X. I'll put a space and paste it in so we can do the Y as well. Okay, so really here, this is the same from range, so 0 to 1, the to range should be from negative 0.5 to 0.5. And notice that it also gives us a lag at the end, and that applies a little bit of easing for us. So I'll put a null down, and here on our circle, what I'm going to do is we can kind of delete this first section, and I'm going to remap our center to be our midpoint X. I'll drag and drop this on and paste it as a reference. I'll drag our Y, put that as a reference as well. Great. We've got our circle moving around and mapped correctly. And now what we want to do is something similar, but with our pinch distance mapping to the size of our circle to start making our brush grow and shrink. So we can actually just duplicate this clamp math component, and we'll connect this again, and we'll connect this to our null. And the difference here is that we really only want to apply this clamp math to the H1 pinch distance for the midpoint. And now what we want to do is look at like what our incoming values are and what we want to remap it to. So for starters, look at this component to the left first to see what our incoming data is. And we're going to take a look at this H1 pinch midpoint distance. So keep an eye on this. Notice that the values go from like around 0.035, and then when my hand's open, it goes to around like 0.4, 0.45. So that's our from range. So 0.035 and to around 0.45. And what we want to remap it to is a particular radius size for our circle. So before we set that, what I want to do is look at like what is our minimum and maximum that we want for our circle. So maybe we want it to go to around like 0.01, and I'll increase this to like 0.1 max. So now in our clamp math, we're going to go here. So our to range should be 0.01 at a minimum, and our maximum should be 0.1. And what's great is that it'll always stay within those bounds. This component will guarantee that your values are actually going to be between 0.01 and 0.1, which is very helpful for our visuals. So now go ahead and go into an active mode here, and we're going to take the H1 pinch midpoint distance and drag it. If you drag it onto the text radius and drop it as a reference, it'll go onto both. So now you should see we can scale this up and down, and there's a little bit of easing applied to it. If you want to make that easing longer or shorter, you can change the lag here. So if I change this to like 1:1, now it'll grow and shrink very slowly. Or if I just do a smaller value like 0.1, it's more immediate but has a little bit of easing. I'll set it back to 0.2. Okay, great. So we've got our point that can stay nicely between our hand. So for the next part, what we want to do is start creating this like brush that will continuously draw. And a way of doing that is by using feedback. And to simplify that process, we're going to go into the palette, into image filters. And if you scroll down, there's a component called feedback. And if you drop that in, now connect this between our circle and our over. And if you set the opacity all the way to 1, it will continuously draw on top of itself. And then we can kind of grow and shrink it. So maybe the next thing we should do is set it up so that if we point up with our hand, it will reset this little feedback here. So a way we can do that, if we make a little bit more space for ourselves, the third output here, if I create a null and attach it, you'll notice that these are different gestures that are available for our hand tracking. So this will tell us how closely it maps to an open palm, finger pointing up, peace sign, thumbs up. So what we want to do is figure out when the finger pointing up gesture happens. And a nice way of doing that, we kind of need a trigger. So this will kind of give us a value of how confident it thinks that it's seeing this gesture. And so a way to do that is to select out. We'll use a select chop. And if we go in here and snag the finger pointing up, and what I like to do here is connect an expression chop. And you can write in an expression here. So we can say, okay, is this value greater than maybe 0.8? And now it'll give us a value of 0 or 1 if it's confident enough that it is pointing up. So this is perfect because we have a little trigger for ourselves to reset the feedback loop. So I'm going to connect a null here, and we're basically going to drag and drop. We'll put this into an active mode, and we're going to drag this over to the reset and pass this as a reference. So now when we point up, it clears the feedback. Okay, great. That's nice. Now the other part that we want to do is be able to kind of like pick up and put down the pen. And one way we can do that is by controlling the fill alpha right here of this circle. So depending on the distance of our hand to the screen, if it's close enough, the fill is going to go to 1, and if it's far enough away, it's going to go to 0. So that kind of picks the pen up. And I'll clear this for now. So for that, what we want to use is this pinch midpoint distance Z. And we can kind of do something similar here as well, where maybe we will additionally put a select chop down, and we're going to select out the Z index. And we can do something similar with another expression. So I'll connect an expression, and we need to look at what values we need to work with. So this is particular to how far away I am from the camera, so you need to figure out what values are going to work well for you. But in my case, if the value is like less than 0.08, then it should be 1 or 0. So is this value less than negative 0.08? Let's see. So nothing. And then now if I get close enough, it intersects. Beautiful. So I'm going to make a little bit more space for myself here. I'll right click here and make a null. And on the circle, we can go ahead and put this in an active mode and put this onto the fill alpha. So now if I get close enough, I'll start drawing. There we go. I can grow and shrink the size of this. And then if I point up, it'll clear it. Awesome. One thing that I kind of like doing as well is having this little like helper UI to show me whether or not the pen was up or down. So the way to do this is actually just duplicate this circle. I'm going to go ahead and copy this expression, and we'll set this alpha to 1 so that the circle is always being drawn. And what we really want is just the border. So there's a border width right here. We can increase it, and we'll turn the fill off. Maybe I'll make it a little smaller. And then for the border color, why don't we make it always blue? And then when the pen is down, this green value will go to 1. So now if I paste in that expression, you can always just drag and drop this back over from your pinch midpoint Z and paste it as a reference. But now when it gets close enough, this will illuminate, which is great. And the way that we can kind of layer this in is that we can insert an operator, which is an over, and we'll want to make sure that this circle gets layered over our feedback. So now this is always visible on top, and then when we get close enough, it lights up and shows where we're actually going to draw. So for this next part, we want to bring in the variations in coloring the brush. So we can actually just take this circle layer right here and multiply it with any texture, and that'll give us our variation. So I'm going to give ourselves a little bit more space, and we'll insert a multiply, and we can just take a movie file in, and then maybe we set this to one of the nature scenes. And if we multiply these two together, notice we set this as if we set this as our background and I clear it, notice that as I start drawing, it will start painting this texture in, which is great. So now we can paint with that particular one. I'll clear this. We could also just snag our video device in as well if you wanted. Here's our null from our video. I could just connect this in as the multiply, and now we could start painting in and leaving trails of the video, which is great. But we kind of want to have a couple different options to cycle between. So a nice way of doing that is by using our like thumbs up gesture to cycle between a couple different videos. So let's set that up for ourselves first so we can have a couple different options to multiply this texture by. The example watercolor visual that I used was actually a noise top. And what I did here is I just went to the common and set this to parent panel size, 32-bit float, so that it's a higher quality. And if you turn off monochrome, you get a bunch of different colors. And we need a way of kind of cycling between these different visuals that we're going to be compositing. So if you put in a switch top and you connect these two together, now if we turn on blend between inputs, we can crossfade between these. And let's maybe get one more texture in here. So I had put in this movie file, which is kind of these waves, and I had this in the same folder as my project. And maybe I would even make a media folder and make sure that it's local to my project like this inside this media folder. And then I'll drag and drop this in. So you can use any video that you would like. And one thing I like to do as well is go into this tune section and turn on hardware decode. Sometimes the frame rate will drop when the video loops to the beginning. And we can go ahead and connect this into our switch. And so now if we go to index 2, we'll get our waves. And this is what we're going to connect to the second input of our multiply. So now you see over here that this is going to draw with that particular texture. Great. Let's organize this a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and take our circle. I'm going to go ahead and take this whole part of our network and scooch it over to the right a little bit more. And maybe I'll put the circle above and move these down for ourselves to have a little bit of space. Great. And then we've got our UI over here. And maybe I'll take this noise and just reorganize it as well. If you want to switch the order, you can go in here and switch the order of your input. So the next part we want to do is be able to give our thumbs up gesture and then be able to increment between these different brushes. So for that, what we can do is go back over to our select for pointing up and the expression. And really, we could actually just duplicate this little part of our network here. So we can take all three of these, copy and paste, and instead of the pointing up gesture, we're going to delete this and use the thumbs up gesture. We might need to set a slightly lower threshold. So here, instead of 0.8, maybe set 0.7 for our trigger. So it needs to be greater than 0.7 in order for it to actually trigger there. And now, the other part is that we don't just need a value that triggers on and off, we need to continuously count up. So there is, fortunately, if we make some space here, a count chop. And if you insert an operator called count, now what we can do is go to this count section and we'll limit it with a loop min and max. And basically we want it to go from 0 to 1 minus the number of elements that we actually need. So in our case, we have 3, so this is going to go to 2, and it's because it starts at index 0. So notice on our switch, we're at index 0, so we're on the first element, and if we go to 1, we go to our waves, and if we go to 2, we go to our third video. So we want this count to go from 0 to 2. And now, if we go ahead and pass this null and put it into an active mode and drag it over to the switch, and we'll drop it onto our index, put it as a chop reference. Whenever we do a thumbs up now, it's going to switch between those and then go back to the beginning, which is great. So we should be able to use that little gesture now, clear our background so we can kind of preview things. So we can now draw with our river, and then we can do a thumbs up, paint with our noise, beautiful, and get some goodies. So for this last part, what we need to do is basically just create our kind of watercolor effect. And the way we can do that is actually by modifying this feedback loop. If you are new to feedback and you want to learn more, what I would recommend doing is heading on over to the learn.derivative.ca, and you can start this course over here. And there's this section over here on working with tops and images. And there's a part specifically on creating a feedback. And I would recommend checking this tutorial out. It's going to give you a bit more background on how to work with feedback in TouchDesigner. And I'll put a link to this as well in the description. So what we're going to do is go into our feedback component here, and notice there's this feedback and a level. And really what we want to do is maybe insert a little bit of blur, and watch what happens even when we just use our blur. Now, as we start to draw, we'll get this kind of like smoky trail, which is kind of fun. Another thing that we can do is actually start to displace things around. So for this part, if I right click here and insert a displace, and I'll connect a noise to it. And similarly from before, I want to go in and use the parent panel size, and I'll use a 32-bit float. And I also want to turn off monochrome, so that way we get a full color image. And let's go ahead and try connecting this, and it's going to go crazy. So we don't actually want this displace amount to be so high. Let's try like 0.01, 0.01. So this is still quite a lot, and maybe we want to take our amplitude of our noise and we can bring it down a little bit. And the other thing that we can do too is we can change the scale of this displacement. So a way to do that is to take this period and you can scale it down, and now you get these kind of finer details, which can look nice. And if you want this motion to continuously update, you can go into the transform section. We can add in a Python expression, so we can type in ABS time.seconds, maybe times 0.1, and it'll add in a little bit of extra motion for us. This might be way too much, so maybe by 0.02. And now as we start to paint it in, it'll sort of continuously move a little bit longer, which can be nice. Cool, so this kind of creates our general kind of painterly effect for us and our brush interaction. And the last thing that I want to do is maybe connect this to an out top. And you can kind of choose whether or not you actually want to composite this over the background so that you can, have a video behind it. And if you want to be able to perform this or kind of put this into a full screen mode, if you zoom all the way out, go to your perform component. Oftentimes what I like to do is, you can enter perform mode, but it might not scale to the right size. So my usual setup for this is to turn off borders, go to the opening size here and set it to fill. And that you can also turn on always on top, so that way you don't get pop-ups. And then if we go into perform mode, there we go. Now our network is hidden and we have kind of this full screen watercolor installation that we can work with. We can do thumbs up. We can get our video back in. Cool. There's a lot of different directions that you can take this. I'm going to go ahead and take this project file and I'll be posting this on the Patreon for download. And if you're interested in taking this further and you want to incorporate different types of interactions, some other things that you can do, try different types of video, try playing around with different types of brushes. You can experiment more with feedback. I hope this gave you some fun examples of how to create some of your interactive hand tracking projects using TouchDesigner. And if you want to dive deeper into hand tracking, consider checking out the 3-part masterclass that I've also got on YouTube. I'll set it up so it's the next recommended video after this one. I also wanted to give a huge shout out to some of my top Patreon supporters. If you found this helpful, consider giving the video a like and subscribing to the channel. One of the best ways you can also support the channel is by joining the Patreon, and you'll get notified whenever I put out new videos or new components. I'm super excited to see what you'll make using this tutorial. And feel free to tag myself and Dom Scott too. We'd love to see what you're working on, and it also helps us figure out how to change or modify the MediaPipe component. Thanks again for following along. I look forward to seeing you in the next one.